All right. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, good- depending on where you're at. I'm Dave Carter with Flower Hill Institute, and we're going to wait for just a minute for folks to come in out of the waiting room before we get started. So just hang with us for a second. Mm. All right. I know we still have some folks coming in, but we don't want to waste any time. We got a lot of ground to cover today. So, as I mentioned, I'm Dave Carter, one of the regional directors of Flowery Hill Institute, and joined with Chris Roper, who's sitting on his tractor today in the middle of hayfield um, there. But the two of us are really pleased to have some great folks with us. Uh, Jillian I'm sorry, I always want to say Day, and Annette Slonim from the Washington Department of Agriculture. We're hoping that Jamie Murray um, from South Dakota will be joining us here shortly when he logs on, because Jamie is with the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe that is actually doing some marketing farm to school and to FDIPR and some of the other programs. So with that, let's just do a couple of housekeeping things here first. First of all, this is being recorded. We do record all of our roundtables. Folks that can't participate and download it and watch it. And secondly, um, as you go and have questions, please put those into the Q&A, not the chat. Chris and I will be looking at the Q&A, and as your questions come in, we'll be passing them along to our guests. And then after the roundtable today, you will be receiving a two-question questionnaire, a survey. First of all, what did you think of today's session? Give us a rating there so we know how we did. But secondly, what are some topics that you would like us to cover moving forward? So, with that, I'm going to ask, well, first of all, Chris, did I cover the bases there?
All good. We're ready to go, I think.
All right, good. So, first of all, let's have a couple of quick introductions. So, Jillian, yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Alrighty, thanks so much for having me. My name is Jillian D. I'm based here in Philadelphia. I'll give you my quick food bio. I usually start by telling folks that I started a small scale veggie farm in rural Virginia and farmed for a few years, selling to wholesale markets like restaurants and CSAs and retailers. And then I moved here to Philadelphia, where I'm based now, and worked at an aggregator and distributor selling local food to institutions. Is at an organization called the Common Market. And we were kind of working with institutions throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. And then over to Food Corps, which is a national nonprofit where I was doing some policy advocacy for farm to school and procurement reform to try and make it easier for small and mid-scale food producers to kind of get into these markets. And then from there, my most recent position was at the USDA, where I was working at AMS on a national program called the Regional Food Business Centers, supporting 12 centers that were based all across the country, who were providing technical assistance and funding and trying to coordinate across other USDA programs to support small and mid-scale food enterprises. Then the past few months, I've just been working on pursuing consulting work for food systems. So that's my new gig, being self-employed. New fun challenges. So that's my,
Good,
yeah,
yeah,
my intro.
great. Annette, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annette Slonim. I use she, her pronouns. I come to farm to school and farm to institution a little bit more from a public health background. My undergraduate studies were environmental studies, really looking at food and food systems and impacts on individual and community health. I got into school nutrition and school wellness through school garden work and nonprofit organizations that partner directly with schools to build gardens, rooftop greenhouses, teach culinary classes, really integrate food and ag education into K-12 curriculum. but was always very interested in the procurement side. How do we actually change the food that shows up on students' trays and in cafeterias throughout the country? So that actually led me to work at the Common Market, where Jillian was my supervisor for the time that I spent there as a sales and outreach specialist. I was working in New York City, doing sales for New York City markets, institutions, and other local food purchasers. And then had the opportunity to move from the East Coast back home to Seattle, where I grew up, pursued a graduate degree in public administration. And now I've been with the Washington State Department of Agriculture for almost 5 years now. I lead our Farm to School program, which is part of our larger regional markets program. We're a non-regulatory technical assistance program focused on supporting economic viability of Washington's small and direct marketing farms. So we really see Farm to School and Farm to Institution both as an opportunity to educate students and get really high quality, good, nutritious food into school meals and increase access to those foods, but also kind of first and foremost as an economic opportunity for small farms where it's a good fit for the farm and their food business.
Great, great. So let's just jump right in. So first of all, maybe Jillian, you might have tackled this, but we talked about farm to school, but there's so many layers of marketing to institutions. Help us, let's dissect that for just a minute.
Sure. Yeah, so when I think about farm to institution, I know a lot of folks think about schools right away, but I thought it might be helpful to lay a little bit more of the broader landscape of what we mean when we talk about institutions. And I will caveat this with the framework that I really learned this from was my time working at a food hub at Common Market, because that's how we saw sales opportunities and trying to reach these different audiences. So there's early child care centers, which tend to be really small, and small eaters, small orders, and they sometimes operate federal meal programs. There are private schools which tend to have more flexible budgets to be purchasing local food, so that's why I thought it might be worth mentioning them. Universities and colleges are another institutional market channel, and they oftentimes have sustainability programs working on their campuses or within their school cafeterias, and you have a student body that tends to be really engaged in sustainability. That can be really helpful. And then hospitals and senior care facilities, they have some similarities and differences, but that's another large sector, which has kind of its own challenges and opportunities, I guess I'll say. Corporate cafeterias is one that I think not a lot of folks think about, but I feel like, Annette, you would probably have a lot to say about that from your time at Common Market. They're another large buyer of food and tend to have less barriers at times than some of these programs that food service programs that work within the USDA programs. And then public schools, which we'll talk about, I think, more at length, but just wanted to mention that the way that public schools buy food is about 80% of what they purchase is going out to bid or on the private market, and 20% of what they buy actually comes from the USDA through the commodity program. Which that is its own market channel as well, like commodity procurement through USDA foods, which I think is pretty challenging from my standpoint. I mean, I just offer this one perspective. I wanted to caveat that too. It's like there's a lot of different ways to do this, and there's like a lot of different approaches. And Annette and I, we know what we know, but there's definitely things out there that it's going to be so context and locally specific. So I feel like we'll talk more about that too. So those are kind of the different institutional market channels. And then there are also intermediaries like food hubs or other regional businesses that do food aggregation and distribution that sometimes can be good partners for ranchers or processors or producers who don't want to do that marketing directly to the institution, but want to have that higher volume of sale. So the intermediary can kind of do all of that sales business development for you if you're working with them. That's a possibility. And then maybe the last kind of layer that I think is worth mentioning is when it comes to institutional food service, there are generally two types, even across all of those channels that I just mentioned, not commodity procurement. They are self-operated cafeterias, and there are those that work with food service management companies. So you might be familiar with businesses like Aramark, Sodexo, Compass. Those are like the three biggest ones that operate globally, actually. But it can be important to know this when you're going into trying to sell your food to an institution, whether they operate their own food programming or whether they outsource it to a third party, because that has implications for how they make purchasing decisions. Self-operated, typically they own and operate the cafeteria and they decide what goes on the menu and who they buy from. And when you're working with a third party, that contracts, or the institution contracts with a third party, and oftentimes they set all of those decisions. So there's like some funny tension there at play. It's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a dynamic to be aware of. So maybe I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah. So how, and this would be for both of, oh, go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
I was just going to add, the school systems are set up very similarly. If you're wanting to sell your products into a school, many of those are with a third-party nutrition company as well. So you're really going to have to do your homework based on where you're at, where you want to supply. You're going to have to probably just call the school, talk to their nutrition director to find out if they do purchasing themselves, if they can do direct purchasing, or if it's all contracted out to a third party nutrition company. And if it is, find out who that is and who their buyer is. I've been down those paths as well. And you can navigate each one of those instances, but you need to know which direction and which path you're going down, because they each have their own challenges. And there's Jillian mentioned the USDA purchasing systems. Commodity procurement is one of them. But you have to know if you're looking at, the SNAP program, the WIC programs, if you're looking at, if you're working on a tribal entity and trying to get into the FDIPR programs, if you're looking at Department of Education funded schools, if you're looking at, even Bureau of Indian Affairs, if you're looking at, some of the tribal schools that we work with. So a lot of different institutions, and Jillian was great to recap many of those, but there's so many that you need to really do your homework to see which ones you're wanting to, try to do business with.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So how do you do, what are some of the best ways to do some of that research? Annette or Jillian, yeah, this is for either of you. Yeah.
I can jump in and let Jillian fill in any gaps. Um, One thing I want to clarify, we're talking about schools, and folks might imagine an individual school, but I want to make sure that folks understand the food service programs are managed at the district level. And you might have a school district, a very tiny school district with one school. You might have a school district with 100 schools. So when we say farm to school, it's really farm to school district. Those purchasing decisions are made, who the vendors are, who sets the menus, what ingredients they're looking for. Those decisions are typically made by a food service director, nutrition services director. There are various titles out there, but that's usually a centralized role for the overall school district. They might do all the ordering centrally. That said, sometimes they delegate ordering to lead cooks or kitchen managers at the school site level. Again, this is going to really vary depending on, it's district by district. Every school should have a nutrition services webpage as part of their school website. So one of the first things I always say is find out who the school districts are in your area. And I simply, I do this all the time. I put in district name plus food service department or child nutrition into Google, and that will usually produce the web page, and contact information can typically be found there if you want to go direct. Many states also have farm to school coordinators at either the Department of Education or the Department of Agriculture. So you can also look up those contacts if you're not sure who to contact at the school district, or if you want to know a little bit more about what schools are already purchasing local foods or might be ripe and ready to hear from you. That can also be another way to do some research instead of doing some blind outreach to contact these districts. Another thing I'll add really quickly too is when you're thinking about if schools are a good fit, we often talk about finding the right size and scale. And usually you can also Google enrollment, or you can look up reports around how many meals does this district serve. For schools that are purchasing local products, they may or may not require or need all of that food to come from a single source. So even if you say, oh, this is a really large school district, I don't produce nearly enough ground beef to serve every child in this district, don't always let that be a barrier. There could still be an opportunity to provide your local beef for a special event. October is National Farm to School Month. Some states have, or some districts have special local days once a month or once a week. They may rotate those local features throughout the district, so it's not every school every day. It might just be a select few sites. So there are opportunities and flexibility there. But it is important to have that conversation and be thinking about based on the products that schools are serving. And you can see that by looking at their menus. Every website typically also has a link, so you can look at what they're serving that month, or you can request their menus and see, okay, what do I see on here that I can realistically provide?
Well, and talk about, when you look at the menu, what about the lead time? If you're going to sell to a school district, what are some of the lead times? If you look and go, oh gosh, next week they're serving, whatever, that's not the time to start contacting them about selling them the ingredients for that, right?
I'll say quickly, lead times can vary. I think when you go into a school district that does not have prior experience buying directly from farms or local meat processors, they operate in this world of oftentimes it's like a very short turnaround delivery. They're ordering through large prime vendors, US Foods, Cisco, and others, where they're placing orders and getting delivery very quickly. So it can be a big systems change and sort of a mind shift to say, okay, if I'm going to buy local beef, I need to communicate with that farmer ahead of time, and they may or may not know what that timeline is, and that timeline might vary for you depending on the size and scale of your production. Do you need to know prior to setting your slaughter dates with your processor so that you're going to have the product available and get that upfront commitment? Are you already operating at a scale where approximately this is how much you're going to have in inventory and stock that you'll have available for a school district? So those are the sorts of details that you'll have to come prepared to a conversation with, and find out how far, to be able to let the school district know how far in advance. I'll say typically schools do set their menus the year prior for the coming school year. So they have to do their commodity orders for USDA commodity foods in February for the following school year. So oftentimes they should have an idea of what is going to be on the menu and how much product they'll need, and how much of that they're going to get from commodity, how much of that they're going to get on the private market, like Jillian had mentioned before, and how much of that could potentially come from a local source. Some schools operate on cycle menus, so you'll see the same menu repeat every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks. That's really helpful for planning and forecasting purposes. Not every school district does that, but that's a good sign. If you do see that, it can be helpful.
I
I'll let
would
Jillian jump in.
also,
So
yeah,
we've already had, yeah,
oh, sorry.
go ahead, Julie.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'd add maybe a couple more things. I just like as Annette was talking, it gave me a few other ideas to mention. I do think size and scale is important. It's like just because your operation is smaller, you could be the perfect size for schools in your area. So that's something really important to keep in mind. And it all really comes to that relationship that I think Annette was starting to get at. It's like, in order to understand what they're looking for, you have to reach out and start that conversation. Like, it has to initiate somewhere. And so much of this work is relationship based and building that knowledge on both sides of the equation. And the way that I've seen the most success is when folks can come at this with that like kind of sales mentality and telling them like here, like not just like quantities and, you know, fat content and the details of specs that the schools and institutions will need, but really like what you're selling in terms of your brand and what you bring, because that really matters to institutions too, is like telling the story of the food. And they really care about reliability and consistency. And that's something that they have a harder time getting from broad scale distributors sometimes, actually. That was one of the biggest selling points for local. If you can create a consistent, reliable product that is high quality for them, a lot of times institutions will position themselves to pay a little bit more for that and be creative with their own budgets to account for that because they want the product that you have. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
I was just going to add real
So
quick, Dave,
we've
too. Dave, they also care about the package sizes and the labeling. So that's super important. As if you're a processor or producer, you're going to have to make sure and have those conversations early to make sure that you can meet the packaging requirements and labeling requirements. Sometimes, you know, if it takes a specific type of packaging and you don't have that equipment, that might be a barrier for you to get into that market. So you need to really plan ahead to make sure you can meet all, and each group might be different. You know, we've listed off a lot of different entities and types of institutions, and they all might have a different requirement. So you're really going to have to do some homework to make sure that you can meet the demands of where you want to be.
So we've had a question come in here, Chris. And this probably, Jillian, this is more in your court, but it says, do we have a resource or a TA contact for the USDA food buying guide interpretation?
Interpretation or the USDA? I'm just kidding. They might be two different people. I do think that there is contact information on the AMS website. I feel like I was pulling it up in our last conversation that I had with you two, and I'll see if I can try and pull it up. There are humans who work at the USDA on this side of the table. So let me see if I can find that even while we're on this call. I think the short answer is yes.
And I'll add for folks, for anyone that doesn't know what the USDA food buying guide is, this is kind of like a Bible in school nutrition. It is a database of almost any food product that a school might serve, and it gives information to the school district about how that product credits. This is probably more detail than folks need to know. But in order to get reimbursed by the federal government, schools have to serve a reimbursable meal, meaning that that meal meets meal pattern and nutrition requirements. And so the food buying guide is this really helpful tool to make sure that schools are meeting those standards. So if you go in, and they actually have a way to access the food buying guide as a vendor. So as a small meat processor, you can go in, you can create an account, you can look up ground beef, you can look up sausage, you can look up a variety of things to look at what the specifications are and how those different products help contribute to the meal pattern.
See, Jamie has joined us now. So I want to bring him into the conversation. Welcome, Jamie.
Sorry for being late.
Yeah.
I apologize for that.
One of those days, right? Yeah.
It's been one of those
anyway,
days.
Jamie, just give a quick introduction, and then I'm going to throw you into the fire. Yeah.
Sure. Jamie Murray. I'm the CEO for the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe Buffalo Authority Corporation. We run a small processing plant in Mobridge, South Dakota, Westside Meats. And we market our buffalo meat all over the United States. We're involved in farm to school, some other institutional meal programs, FDIPR. We've had some experience in that. I'm happy to be here and apologize again for being late.
So, well, in the discussion we've had so far, the term homework has come up many times about do your homework. So tell folks a little bit just how you got started into marketing farm to school or USDA, whatever. Yeah.
Sure. Well, that was always a kind of a priority of our corporation was to, start getting buffalo back into our people's diets. And we kind of decided that our focus should be on the youth and on the children. And it just so happened that farm to school grants were open through USDA, and we applied and we received a planning grant to start with. And I know we weren't the first to ever do it, but it felt like we were like reinventing the wheel, wanting to use farm to school to serve a red meat protein. So there was a lot of misinformation from USDA to school systems. Just what were the rules? What could you do? We had to overcome quite a bit of that to start with, and then from there we were successful in getting an implementation grant, and that's where we really kind of kicked the tires and started getting some meat into our schools.
Great. Great. No, that's good background. So we've got some questions that have been coming up here at this point, and I'll circle back to you in just a minute here, Jamie. But
Yep.
Kathy Webster's asking, says we sell to some schools, and Chris brings up a good point on package sizing. We will typically do 10-pound packages or even 5-pound. My question is, what labeling requirements are you talking about? If it is processed with USDA and has their bug on it, or are there other labeling requirements required?
I'll hit that real quick, and Jillian touched on it, but some of it comes back even to nutrition content and nutrition requirements. Some of these things can be added to a label, or some things might have to be sent in ahead of time to make sure your product meets all the nutritional requirements and guidelines. So, depending on what group or what agency or what department you're working with, they could have very specific requirements that they need to see, whether that's provided by you ahead of time or provided on a label. So again, it's part of doing your homework and understanding, what different groups will require from you.
I think I'll also add that I
Just
think
to let her.
Oh, sorry. I think that schools will often specify this as well. If you're like doing formal procurement with them, they will be very specific about what labels. But it does vary from school to school and state to state, so it's hard to give like a blanket answer on that. I know that's not very helpful though.
Great. Before we jump to the next questions, just to let everybody know, Nicole is putting into the chat some of the links to some of the guides and directories, but we will also have that available afterwards too. So Andrew says, can you cover the Department of Defense fresh and tribal projects? Who's got some expertise to be able to talk about that?
I think that's a super broad question. I think Jamie has worked in that space, but that's really broad. We may have to nail down and go a little deeper on what they're looking for exactly.
I can just quickly jump
Andrew,
in.
maybe
Just to
go
clarify,
ahead.
the Department of Defense Fresh program is only for fresh fruits and vegetables, so may not be applicable to this audience unless folks are also producing fresh fruits and vegetables. But that's another avenue that schools have through really, it's the Department of Defense Logistics agencies. So these are regional procurements, competitive procurements, and school buyers are one of a group of buyers that can purchase off these contracts for fresh produce using their entitlement funds. So this is similar to the funds that they use to purchase USDA commodity foods.
Another thing here in the Q&A, it says the Farm to School Network of National Center for Appropriate Technology has a fantastic producer toolkit that has so much information about selling to schools, has some info on labeling and product sizing, and then they list the link. And again, we'll have all of these links available afterwards. But Annette, you were nodding your head there. So are you familiar with that one?
I know that one. that this is I think this is a USDA grant funded project from a few years ago where the National Farm to School Network partnered with NCAT to create almost like a toolkit and curriculum and go basically it's like a road show working with the state agencies to do training basically on bringing the farm to the school. And that is a really great resource. I'm glad someone brought that up.
Great, great. So Jamie, I'm going to circle back to you for a second because when we talked on Friday, um, and even when we talked with Annette and Jillian before, price is always a big factor. Um, selling to schools or selling into the institutional market is not a way to get the probably the highest price for your product. But what are some of the things? Jamie, first of all, what are some of the things you've done to help balance that and get a decent price for your products?
Well, you know that I mean that's always been an issue for us. Like the price point that we sell at and what they can buy, the schools can buy from some of the other resources is, we're quite a bit above that most of the time, and it's always been a struggle. And um, we've taken the approach of trying to get buy-in from higher level. Be it school boards, tribal council. I've used this example a few times before, and I know I'm probably going to say the wrong school, but I want to say it was O'Neill, Nebraska. I went and participated in a Nebraska farm to school, and there was a gal there, and she at their school district they serve 100% locally sourced beef, and the question came up like, how did you pull that off? And she said it really came down to the school board came to me and they said, this is what we want. And she said, well, it's going to cost probably double what we're spending now. And they said, we don't care. This is what we want. We want this in our schools, and this is what we want our children to have. So, we've really taken that approach, and, with some degrees of success, but we've had to get kind of creative. On the buffalo side of things, we were fortunate enough to be able to partner with the Nature Conservancy. And every year for the past 3 years, I want to say maybe 4, they've donated buffalo to our farm to school program. Harvest ready animals, 50 to, I think the most was around 100 head we got. And so basically we were able to, sell that product to the schools for the cost of processing, which in most cases, we were selling like ground buffalo for $3 a pound, which I don't know if any of you have been to the store lately, but it's probably over 10 now. So that was one creative way, because we just couldn't get the schools to justify that extra cost. So that's been one thing we've done. We've looked for ways to do that on the beef side. In South Dakota, and I'm sure other states have like beef to school programs, and it's basically the same thing, but it's producers donating an animal to a school district, which I mean it's great. It's getting the product in there, but I mean we need to find a way to pay that producer for that product. We want to be able to pay our producers, and yeah, we've really been hitting hard, like our administration, our tribal council, and like some mandates. Maybe it's not every meal, but maybe if we could get a couple meals a month of locally sourced beef or buffalo, that's a start. Let me tell you, the kids know the difference. We've done a lot of blind testing in our schools, and the kids know the difference right off the bat. So yeah, that's kind of been our experience. Just know the price point is going to be an issue. You can't compete with the pricing that's out there and get I mean, it's not even a break even right now, honestly.
Well, and I know one of the things some of the folks have done is don't focus so much on making your beef or your bison the center of the plate item, but
Yeah.
as an ingredient in taco salad or something like that. They
Sure.
help moderate that. But Jillian and Annette, what are some of the other resources that folks can have to help balance that price equation? Or you drawing a blank on me?
That's a great question, and it's a really hard question. One thing I'll note: some states, not every state, um, have grant programs that are funded. There was a period where there was funding available through USDA. Unfortunately, those specific programs have ended. If anyone was familiar with the local food purchasing for schools or local food purchasing assistance. In Washington, we're very fortunate that our state legislature has funded our farm to school program to make grants to school food buyers. So we reimburse, it's a competitive grant application, schools have to apply for it. We're moving towards a biennial cycle, so every 2 years. Specifically to reimburse purchases of local Washington grown foods, including meat and poultry. And beef is actually the number one purchase through that program. I think for many of the reasons that Jamie spoke about, the quality is uncomparable in terms of what they get through the commodity system. It's just a totally different product, and the schools know it and the kids know it. And it's often, there are some limitations in terms of what schools can actually use. Not every school is set up to cook raw beef. That's also a consideration to be thinking about. We haven't talked about this yet, but kitchen facilities and production facilities also play a factor in how much local beef schools are able to buy and in what form. We've seen some innovative strategies around blending beef with lower cost items, like a lentil, like doing a beef lentil patty, or even blending local beef with commodity beef to help stretch that purchase and make it go a little bit further, or reserving those purchases for special occasions. I mentioned at the top of the call, National Farm to School Month takes place every October. Schools usually will plan special menus or special features. Harvest of the Month is also typically, I think when it first started, it's a concept where you feature a different local food item every month and really do a lot of promotion and hype around that food. It started mostly with fruits and vegetables, but we see schools featuring beef as a Harvest of the Month as well. And so finding out, do you do a Harvest of the Month? Do you feature beef? Could that be an opportunity where schools might be willing to spend a little bit more for that special feature? End of school year barbecues is another one in Washington that we've seen, where schools will invite parents and families who are paying full price for those meals as well. So that can be another strategy. But it can be a challenge for sure, especially when you're competing against those commodity beef prices, which are much lower than what a small producer can afford to charge.
You talked about the programs that Washington has, but for other states, what would be your recommendation for how do people contact their state departments of agriculture? How can they best maybe do their homework, as we've been talking about, of what might be available in their state?
Absolutely. I'll say, and then it looked like Jillian was going to say something too. Most states have a farm to school coordinator, whether that's at the Department of Education or the Department of Agriculture. So again, look, I would simply use Google, or you can reach out to me and I can help you. My contact information will be shared. Identify who that person is in your state. And similar to my role here in Washington, it's really about facilitating those connections. So working one-on-one with producers to help identify the schools that would be a good fit for you based on your products, scale, business, distribution capacity, all those sorts of things. And also help navigating all the rules and regulations that go into selling to schools. But yeah, I would start with that. See, is there anybody listed in your state agency? You could also try your extension offices at the county level as well. In Washington, a lot of our county extension offices also provide support for farm to school. One other institution that I don't think was mentioned was food banks and emergency feeding as well. And so we see a lot of farm to food bank, farm to food pantry. Especially at the local and county level here in Washington.
Yeah, and those are critical right now just because school's out, and so kids aren't getting a lot of the regular meals during the summer. So, Jillian, I'm sorry, you were going to add something in.
It's
there as well.
Yeah, I think I want to like say that the thing that we're like talking about, but maybe not necessarily directly, or maybe we are. It's like an elephant in the room kind of thing where like schools and food banks are amazing places to get these products. And to Jamie's point, like we want farmers to get paid, we want ranchers to get paid, and those systems are at odds with each other. And there's a lot of like political and policy reasons for that. So, in terms of resources where you are, in addition to all of the things that Annette mentioned, if you're not already, I would encourage you to like poke around with nonprofits or advocacy groups who are working on these issues in your states, because those like having worked in the sort of nonprofit advocacy world in this space, like those folks are talking to each other all the time and sharing resources, and they are really often looking for a producer perspective, a processor perspective that's often missing from the conversation when we're trying to make better policies that work better for you all and the work that you're trying to do. I mean, just like a basic example that we've been talking about on this call is the fact that school districts often cannot afford to purchase a better quality product because they operate on this reimbursement model, and they get so little money for trying to put food on the plates for kids. So like until that model changes, and one of the big pushes in the past couple of years has been around universal meals, so that we don't have this several tiered system where some kids are paying a full price, some kids are getting free meals. If you reduce the paperwork and all the bureaucracy that comes with running a program like that, you open the door for these food service directors at these schools who really want to be creative and just have their hands tied, and it creates a more functional, viable like business model for them, because they are running their own small business of a school cafeteria inside of a school district. That's something a lot of people don't understand. So I would be remiss, having talked to a lot of school nutrition directors in my day, I feel like I'd be remiss by not like representing that perspective so that people can better understand. It's not that they don't want to pay more. Most of the time, if not all of the time, they want to pay more and they want the product. It's like these sort of structural barriers.
So, and we've got a couple of questions here. Before I jump to those, I just want to talk, you talked about talking to the school nutritionists or the school boards, whatever, and early on you talked about relationships are so important. What would be some suggestions for starting those conversations with those decision makers?
Yeah. And I will say, like, you can find that type of leadership and the folks who are willing to work with you and reach out in all kinds of places. I think the food service director is one of the, or the school nutrition director is one of the most important to have that relationship with, because they are the ones who make the purchasing decisions. But like Jamie mentioned, like, if you can get like the folks that they report to understand the value that you're bringing, like all the better. And sometimes that can have kind of a broader impact. So both of those levels are important. And I think it might also come down to the type of institutional marketing channel. We were talking at the top about these different perspectives. If you're trying to sell your food to a university, like the college kids might actually be the way in, because they can put pressure on the cafeteria. Like the constituency of whoever this institution is feeding sometimes can be where the way in is. And it can be through people that you already know. You just need to like ask the question and have a conversation. I feel like I've seen it happen that way too. I know I'm missing folks right now though, but those are like some of the ones that come to mind. Like the actual ones who make the purchasing decisions at big school districts, you'll have a dining services director and a procurement manager that operate in separate offices. One's operating in the business office of the school district and the other is like working in the cafeterias. So sometimes like you need the buy-in of that person too. Having the buy-in on the education side of things, kind of what Annette was talking about at the top of the call, when it comes to school nutrition, if you can get a principal or a superintendent, the ear of them to really care about what you're doing, that can then like put a little bit of gentle pressure on trying to make different purchasing decisions across the district. So those are some other things to think about. You're on mute, Dave.
Sorry, I'm sitting in a ranch house kitchen here, so I'm trying to be on mute as much as possible. Jamie, what were some of the things that you did to start building those relationships?
Oh, I think really similar. Started with the kind of the food service directors. And I don't know if it's unique, but one of the things that we dealt with is, we have BIE schools, we have public schools, we have tribal schools. We even deal with some private schools. So everybody's, their procurement procedures are all different. They're maybe the person who makes that decision is different. So I think that food service director or head cook or someone in that is probably a good first start, and then the school administrator being second for me. I really want that buy-in from the school administrator, be it the principal or superintendent, and so they can see the value of that and help facilitate that. And then from there we've kind of moved on to like the school boards and tribal council and things like that. But like in my area, most of our school board members are also ranchers, so it's not a real hard sell in terms of convince them that local beef is good, or local buffalo is good. It just usually comes down to money. And I don't know. I'm not delicate enough sometimes, but I'm quick to point out the $1 million they spent on the football field, but yet they want to complain about 50 cents a pound more for beef. So um, things like that. I mean, sometimes I think that stuff just needs to be brought to their attention. Where are we putting our value here?
No, excellent point. And Kathy has a comment here. It says, I wonder if some of the nutrient density studies could be of some help to justify the price point of locally sourced good quality meat. Um, Jillian, have you had some experience with any of that type of information?
I don't know about nutrient density studies, but I think actually the child taste testing that Jamie talked about is very compelling for people, where you get like very direct feedback on the quality of the product. I think it depends on who you're trying to convince, though, right? Because different people need different kinds of messages.
Andrew from Alaska says one of the barriers to getting native foods to list of USDA or school purchases is FNS, Food and Nutrition Service Working Group, and State Food Department. We tried dry kelp, herring, and reindeer jerky, but got caught in red tape. That's probably not alone in some of that when you're trying to do particularly some of the more unique uh, items there. So, Mark Beatty is wondering, is there a chance there will be another round of funding for schools to purchase locally sourced products? Cost is the primary barrier I've come up against. They consistently reference having grant money a few years ago, but it isn't available now. I guess, Jillian, you're more recently attached to the federal government, so I'll let you jump in first.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to not be wearing that hat anymore. Yeah, I am an optimist. I am an optimistic realist. Let me say that more appropriately. I think these are the kinds of things that can happen, but it takes a lot of advocacy work to do it. I know a lot of people who are very disappointed that the local food for schools and local food purchase assistance program grant funding that you're talking about, that it was canceled early. And, these things come in waves. And I do think because that program, those two programs in particular, had so much success, and frankly, the story hasn't really been told yet. And I think that's part of what we need to do is continue to tell our state legislators and our local legislators that these are the things that we care about and this is what we want. And I think we need to do it in an organized way. And when I say we, I mean people who care about local food. And that's a lot of different people, and it's very hard to organize those people because by their nature they are working locally. So I don't know if it will be the exact same programming, but I do think between the program I was working at the USDA, the Regional Food Business Center program, and all of these different programs like LFPA and LFS, there was a lot of money that got put into local food development and infrastructure development in the past 5 years. And And there's a lot that can and should be learned from that. And I know some people who are working on that, and that's part of what I'm trying to work on too. One of the projects as a sidebar that I'm working on is how to make the USDA Foods program work better for small and mid-scale producers, because it is a big, complicated program that's really not working well for anyone as far as we can tell. So I'd say that's why I think it's like when you have the time, because you have so much time, do get involved in advocacy efforts in your states and nationally, because these are the exact kind of things that I think our legislators need to hear.
And I'll just add a couple quick notes there. One thing I think there can be a focus on these types of grant programs, but when I think about big picture systems change, really the challenge is that schools don't have enough money to operate their programs. And those grants can be helpful because they support a certain number of schools or certain producers, but then, what happens when those grant funds go away? Nationally, or just to clarify, the amount of funding that schools get for their meals is set by Congress. USDA decides many of the rules with public comment and input, related to some of the questions that are coming through the chat, is sort of what foods qualify, how they credit for service in those meals. But when it comes to the actual amount of money that schools get to run their programs, that reimbursement amount, right now nationally, it's set at about $4.60. And that is set by Congress. So I think just another avenue or another strategy, in addition to bringing back these special grant programs, is to how do we actually just get our federal government to fund the full cost of operating school meal programs, and really tagging that to inflation, tagging that to cost of living, tagging that to minimum wage laws. In Washington, we have very high minimum wage laws, which means a very large chunk of that $4.60 goes to labor, which reduces the amount of money that schools have to actually spend on their food costs. And that looks different across the country. So just wanted to note that too. And locally as well as nationally, there are farm to school networks, and these can be great organizations to plug into, to learn about what are the advocacy opportunities within your state or within your region, or nationally, what's happening at the federal level. Nationally, one group is called the National Farm to School Network. They have been policy leaders for 20 plus years in this space, really pushing and driving the farm to school movement with lots of grassroots support from across the country. And then many states have their own farm to school networks. So again, go to Google, look up your state farm to school network, and get connected that way. They might be involved in advocacy. They might also just be a networking organization. Back to Dave's questions around how do you connect? How do you even start that conversation and find food service directors? These networks can be a really great opportunity for getting connected and getting plugged into what's already happening around farm to school and local food in your state.
You're on mute again, Dave.
Again, sorry about that, guys. Andrew has a couple other comments here. Well, first of all, before I go to that, I have to tongue in cheek. One of the questions I had teed up here was, are politics ever a consideration in institutional marketing? I think we covered that. Andrew is talking about several things with the FDIPR labeling working group. We've talked about the FNS. Jillian, from your standpoint, there's some working groups at USDA talking about some of these programs that
When we say working
would be
groups,
helpful for people. Yeah. It said, well, in her question, it says, in addition, the FDIPR Food Package Review Work Group is in the process of evaluating potential additions to the food package that have already, yeah. So explain a little bit about any of these if you know. Yeah.
I'm gonna guess.
Or did we
Just from my stint at USDA, there are sometimes sort of ad hoc working groups that pop up internally to help respond to like public comment and or organize around things that like input and feedback that the agency is getting about specific programs. So I think that that's what that's referring to, but I'm not 100% sure, to be honest.
Okay. And yeah, if you would contact us, yeah, afterwards with some of this, I think we can keep this conversation going and get into some more of the information. Um, I think we've got all of the questions that have been put into the Q&A answered right now. So if you have some more, let us know. But we're getting close to time, so let's just kind of go around with some closing thoughts here. And Jamie, since you came in last, I'm going to call on you first
Fair
on
enough.
this, just for some closing thoughts of do's and don'ts and what you've learned over the last few years. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a learning experience for us for sure, just getting out there and making it known that it's available. These are things, it's surprising how little a lot of schools know about the farm to school program, so if you do get into those situations, be prepared for a lot of education. We battled this state inspected buffalo, and it's not UST inspected. You can't serve that in school lunch program. Well, that we proved them wrong on all that stuff, but we had to prove them all wrong, even USDA staff and FNS staff. So I mean, it's not always the easiest hill to climb, but I think the end result is absolutely worth it. I mean, if we're not going to prioritize the health of our children, I mean, I don't know what we're doing all this for.
Yep. Good point. Good point. Excellent. Jillian, go
I,
ahead.
I think that was very well put. If we're not going to prioritize the health of our children and the viability of the family farmers and ranchers in this country, I don't know what we're doing. Like I think both matter tremendously. Both are under resourced tremendously. And what y'all are trying to do is to find that meeting point. And it does take a lot of work because there's a lot working against us. But don't lose hope, because even those small wins make an enormous difference. And I think finding those small wins to try and build momentum and keeping your eye on the prize in terms of the bottom line for the ranchers and the processors and what is workable for the school nutrition community, like that's where the sweet spot is. And it just takes a lot of conversations to get there sometimes.
And that Jillian and Jamie set a pretty high bar for closing comments here. So yeah.
I know. I'm not sure I have too much to add. I just want to underscore the importance of relationships and that this work happens because of relationships, because of building that trust. And to start small. Farm to school, this is a long game. This movement's been building for a few decades now, and there's still a long ways to go, and it's an uphill climb. And we've learned a lot, and there's a lot of examples and good precedent out there. So if you find that you're hitting roadblocks, you're getting stuck, reach out, reach sideways. Somebody has navigated this before, and there are people out there who want to see you succeed and support you in your efforts. So if you're feeling isolated or discouraged, just know that there are resources. You can contact any of us on this call. If we can't help you, we'll get you connected to someone who can.
Which is a good time for Nikki to put up the slide with your contact information. And while she does that, yeah, I would just say that Chris and I are both available to help you try and navigate that. But you know, Jillian, Net, and Murray and Jamie are great resources as well. So, Chris, you got the last word here.
A lot of great information. This is a very tough space. None of this work is easy, as many have said today. I think everyone on this call is doing the work because they're passionate about this work and their goals and what they hope to do. I feel like a lot of our folks attending today's webinar are in the same position. They're obviously passionate about what they do. They're trying to do things for the right reason. They're trying to get food into their schools, feed their elders, and it is hard work. So there's no easy way to do it. So thank you to everyone that tuned in today, and thank you to our panelists as well.
Absolutely. And I would just say we do have a resource document that has been on our online toolkit. I'm going to update it with some of the information that we just had today, but that will be attached as a link when we archive this roundtable in our website. So it's an additional resource there. Just a reminder that you will be getting a survey here momentarily. Let us know how we did. Let us know what you'd like us to cover moving forward. And with that, Chris is going to go back to haying, and everybody can, yep, have the rest of their day. So I just want to thank Jillian and Annette and Jamie for great information. This has been very helpful today. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye
Thanks,
bye.
everybody.